So, when I originally came up with this idea of playing a character with two heads, I didn't really think about it too much. I just thought of it as a cool gimmick to stick it on some random character and go back on sitting on it and inevitably not play it until the next big idea comes and hits me. However, the more I kinda simmered on it, the more it stuck in my head. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I began looking through media, mainly video games with two-headed characters. I started conceptualizing builds and personalities, and I even looked on YouTube and didn't even find a video about it. And not gonna lie, when I saw nothing on it in the context of D&D, I deadass went, holy fucking shit, I'm Einstein. I really thought I was the shit, like coming up with some original video that's totally, not really, gonna pop off in the TTRPG space and ignite some conversation. So I began making this video. Thankfully, a little bit into it, I discovered, like many before, I am not original. Turns out, after rewording a search on YouTube, NerdArchy made something quite similar before. However, they went on a more conversation about it and made it quite a mechanical discussion, which I do plan on talking about. I recommend checking out some of the other videos, including this one that I mentioned it as a reference to or pulled certain ideas from, but they discuss the idea of two players in one body and how they would rule it. But I, however, want to go a bit more in depth, like potential personalities, builds, how to manage it and run it as a player or DM, roleplay, and whether or not you should do it at all, which is the first thing that definitely should be addressed. Should you even try? Well, I think that if you're a very competent DM with a lot of experience playing as a player and watching for character dynamics and not stepping on people's toes, you could do it. Of course, with permission from a DM or the other players. But I'd be very wary and communicate often to avoid any hassles or issues, and maybe try not to play a big role, like don't go for the spotlight too often, just because, inherently, you're being kinda greedy. You're playing two characters rather than just one. Now, obviously, this comes from the idea of one player in one body with two heads. You could share the roleplay aspect, but then that's putting pressure on another player, or even more pressure on the DM, who is probably pulling out their hair over many, many other things. I also like to emphasize that I have not actually tried this yet, due to lacking a table to play as a player at, or just DMing and not wanting to insert a two-headed character. Also, while possible, I don't think that sharing the character's body or actions with another player is going to go well. You're putting a lot of faith into one person to hopefully not fuck up and plant your character out of range or on the side of a cliff or cast a spell instead of attacking, etc, etc. Especially since if you go down, it becomes very easy to start casting blame on one another. However, it's definitely possible to play a character like this. It's just quite a bit harder than your average D&D character, and it's probably more suited for a one-shot or a shorter campaign, so you don't give yourself or others too much of a headache. Again though, like everything in this game, communicate, 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 Jesus Christ. Now, while I'm on this topic, I want to also mention some of the other pitfalls that people might not initially think of when playing a character or dealing with a character like this. Firstly, is from the actual player standpoint, it's surprisingly easy to fall under the it's what my character would do. They're in their evil personality right now. Your chaotic multi-personality murder hobo. This is very dangerous for a game as a whole, and likely for the DM to start dropping rocks on you, in-game or IRL. It's also particularly dangerous of misrepresenting certain disorders, such as DID or BPD or conjoined twins, or just general ableistic things, and it's just very similar to that whole multi-personality character thing. Think you're Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, your guy in Split, and probably your first ever OC. There's two shorts by CinderBlocksally. I can't find it right now, but he has two shorts talking about multi-personalities. One I can find at the moment writing the script, and the other I'll try to find as I look around before publishing this video. It will be in the description if I find it, or on screen now, but check those out. That's where I notice more of the dangers with this type of character. Another danger is only really using one head or personality and never the other, because at that point you might as well not be two-headed. But it also shows either a pure preference to one head, or the ability to only think as one character at a time, or a fear of using both, or even just being forgetful. And vice versa. There is the more egotistical one of talking only to yourself, which can be funny as a one-off little argument to show neutrality on whether or not you can do one thing or the other, having one head argue against the other. But if you find yourself chatting away to yourself too often and not caring about the other players, then you've hit a wall and you need to turn that around quickly. From the DM's perspective, you might start getting confused on how certain spells should affect them, like Enfeeble Mind or Charm Person. I again think that the player should just be one person, so both heads are affected even if it only targets one person, and it's technically two. Just use the logic that if they are sharing the same memories and body, effects should be shared too to avoid confusion or actually, and maybe only spare it as a rule cool type of thing or flavor thing, where one character is still kind of affected by something but the other keeps trudging on. Kind of keep it simple, stupid thing. Another idea is trying to decide whether fantasy racism or ableism should be a thing in your game, and don't do that. Unless it's a theme that everyone wants to explore safely and consent to do so, then sure. But again, more dangerous territory. Better not do that unless you're looking for another entry into that RPG horror stories. Also, try not to pick a favorite or a hatred too. It's annoying if you're only talking to one head and you're making the other having to butt in all the time, and that's no fun either. Just have characters address them both and let the player respond. Again, treat it with a kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. There are probably some other things that I might not have seen or mentioned for the sake of time or lack of critical thinking or foresight, which I'm sure someone is bound to point out in the comments. Thank you if you do and you're nice about it. I'm kind of stupid and tunnel vision, so my bad if I missed the more obvious issues. But after all those warnings and concepts, I want to get mechanical. I don't want to have a study. I want to fight things, do stuff. Let's talk about builds before we talk about personalities. Oh yeah, I could spend a fucking year looking at the books and D&D Beyond trying to assign a character a class. Now, there is two ways of dealing with this. You could make the characters first and then assign the class, or pick the class and then the character. And that is entirely up to you, or just to circumstance. Like, entering a game that already has a barb, a fighter, and a melee ranger, don't come in with another barb. Pick something that works with the team, and if you want to play the team heart or smarts in the 5-man band, save it for another time if everyone is already that and they're lacking the big guy archetype. But I think there's a really good way to play this type of character, and that is as a generalist, a jack of all trades but master of none. Whatever one head is good at, make the other pick up where the other lacks. It gives each head somewhat of a role in combat and roleplay, and it really suits multiclassing or half-caster classes. So let me go list off a bunch of potential builds with 5th edition from 2014. Quick note, I am using some of these characters from games to help me conceptualize some of these builds, being Village the Curseling from Warhammer, Idol from Killer Instinct, Cho'Gall from Heroes of the Storm, the twins from DBD, Ettins and Cyclopses in D&D, and maybe a few others I haven't looked at yet or forgot to mention but still thought to mention. For the sure part of picking a species, any could work, but two that would work particularly well would be the Goliath and Kalishtar. Goliath is great since you can just say that you are half an Ettin or descended from Ettins, and is great for the more tanky bruiser type of fighters with their athletics proficiency, their inbuilt damage reduction on reaction, and cold damage resistance. Kalishtar is more suitable for the dual minds aspect, both literally and figuratively. It kind of builds into that idea that you can't be affected by sleep spells, and you have resistance to psychic damage. A fun one as well could be the Thri-kreen, I can't remember how to pronounce it, but you get to not only have double the heads, but double the arms. which can also lean into who controls what sets of arms, but either way, go wild. Anything can work with anything with just a bit of flavor. A prime example of a good generalist build would be the Swords Bard. One head could sing or play the harmonica, or they could be harmonizing as one head or both control the body in a dance or fight. You hardly need to multiclass, as you get the ability to cast spells and fight from afar and melee, and even get the Jack of all trades feature, which is oddly suitable. Make them high charisma, high dex and con, and either take dueling or more likely 2-weapon fighting, and just start slinging spells and buffs and doing all the bard stuff. If you want to get a bit more into melee, get a few levels into Hexblade Warlock, or preferably Fighter, maybe Battlemaster or Cavalier, or that Purple Knight one that shares the second wind and eventually Action Surge, and you're golden. Warcaster or Resilience also goes very well with this choice of class, and you can very well be the party skill monkey with expertise. But again, watch for people's toes here. A more tanky version of this would be an Eldritch Knight Fighter. A half-caster with an emphasis on strength or dex, con, and intelligence. Prioritize your body stats if you want to be more of a decent fighter, and take spells that avoid save DCs, like Mirror Image, Blur, Shield, and Green Flame Blade, to avoid Mad, and go nuts on enemies in melee. Most fighting styles work, but 2-weapon fighting is on brand, defense is nice, and great weapon fighting is also handy. This can also go pure into fighter, but if you want to start slinging out more spells, check out wizards. Abjuration and blade singing wizards are great and go well with fighter, and each have their ways of becoming surprisingly tanky while throwing out the occasional fireball. So, half-casters and half-caster subclasses in general work well. Rangers, paladins, artificers, war clerics, hexblades, etc. But for a more in-depth multi-class is where it gets fun. You want to make your heads synergize yet stand out from one another. The easiest way to do that is the spell sword way, combining a full martial class like bards, rogues, fighters, and monks with a full caster, such as cleric, wizard, sorcerer, and warlock. As a heads up, most of these will be mad, so if you do want to have an emphasis on one or the other, if your game is combat heavy and you don't want to drop dead every other turn. My absolute favorite idea is the Wild Magic Barbarian with a great old one Warlock. Now, you might already be saying, Sloopa, barbs can't cast spells when raging, and Goo Warlock is kinda ass. To which I say, yes and yes, you are right, but as suggested by the YouTuber D&D Shorts in one of his underrated multiclass videos, it's possible to make a very decent bar block with the right stats and sacrifices. You can get 16 in strength and 14s in dex and con. Then you can get your minimum in charisma and maybe a starting feat like telekinetic or shadow touch to bump it up to 14, and dump intelligence and wisdom should you not be cowardly. From there, get 6 levels into Bard for bolstering magic, and 3 into Warlock, taking Pact of the Tome with your preferred cantrips like Guidance. For invocations, take Eyes of the Runekeeper, or Devil's Sight, or any other invocations of your choice. I'm not your man. From there, take the usual spells that are not concentration, mainly Eldritch Blast, Armor of Agathis, and Mirror Image. I think this build looks really wonky and inefficient from the outside. And yeah, it does, but it comes together surprisingly well. Basically, outside of combat, you have a surprisingly decent charisma, and with a background like Hermit or Acolyte, you have a lot of relatively useful proficiencies that you aren't the best in, but will always be useful. Your DM might fall in love with you or hate you though, when you start to state that you can communicate with any creature telepathically via the Goo Warlock's first level ability, and be able to read any text no matter the language. And also detect magic at will with your big eyes from the Wild Magic Barb's magic awareness. Then, you are also able to recover your spell slots on a short rest, but if you also roll nicely, you can recover other spell slots, or your own, with the bolstering magic roll too, which will make others quite happy to have you around when they no longer need detect magic or comprehend languages prepped at all times, and recover a potential fireball back for them. You basically become the party's translator and magic detector, and this will be discussed more soon, but if you give this character an innate curiosity to learn magic, then boom, you're the wizard's best friend. You might also be saying that Wild Magic Sorcerer and Barb is more thematic, and yes, it is, but their spells are more blasty and lack buffing non-concentration spells, which clashes a lot with Barb. Funnily enough, Bard works better mechanically for that, since you can provide Bardic in a rage since it's not a spell. In combat though, as D&D Shorts stated, you can cast your buffs before the fight, and then blast your way into combat. Then, once it gets close to melee, rage and run in. Mirror Image makes it harder to hit you even with advantage, and when they do hit, you're getting twice as much as temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis, and more damage out of it. On top of this, you get your chaotic effect from the Wild Magic Barb table, which some are more useful than others of course, but notable effects include the bonus action teleport every turn, the ability to throw and recall your weapon, dealing force damage as a Thorns effect, or the +1 to AC for you and your allies. I like to focus the Barb for most levels, definitely up to like a level 10 or 15. You really want that unstable backlash for more versatility, and it just gives you more stuff when you get up to that level. While only take a few in Warlock, around level 5 or 6 or higher if you feel, but I just feel like, again, you get more out of the Barbarian's abilities, while your Warlock is more supporty. But do mess around with it. Like many other Warlocks work, except for the Hexblade since you lose rage damage. But better crit, so I don't know, up to you. And Warlocks are just very fun, since they add a lot to your character in why they would sell their souls or make their pact to their patron, and it's very customizable. Hell, take fucking Great Weapon Master if you want. Take that D3 and Reckless, and you basically remove the -5. The only suggestion is to not rely too much on a bonus action attack, because Rage and many of its wild magic features use that bonus action. And even your reaction can get quite busy if you picked Goliath earlier and get to that level 10 Barb. It's also a high level build, but the Barbarian can carry you till you pick up that Warlock level if you didn't pick it early. Go investigate yourself for some of the weirder combinations, like Echo Knight Fighter with Death Domain Cleric, or the more common ones like Paladin Sorcerer Warlock combos. But get weird with it, make things not perfectly click, because I think it was Brendan Lee Mulligan in his Wired interview that the one odd out of place part of your build or character can make them far more interesting. But even the coolest builds will feel like mold if you have a shitty character personality, so here's probably the most conceptual part of the video. Now, here is where it's mostly up to you. You may have expected more of a clear cut, do this and act this way, but no table is the same and no game is the same. If you start playing an Eternal Sunshine character who wears propeller hats to Curse of Strahd, or that twisted fucking psychopath to Witch Beyond the Wildlight, you're gonna conflict with the vibe of the game, and you're probably gonna ruin the fun for the more serious people at your team. But usually, everyone has their archetype or trope or gimmick that they're following. A lot of overly sarcastic production videos discuss tropes, and a lot of D&D character building guides, such as Pointy Hats or Ginny D's, will suggest to have a gimmick to lean on when you're unsure what to do. However, your case is a little different, since you have double the work and gotta make your character have chemistry with not only yourself, but your other head and everyone around them. How the fuck do you do this? Well, it's hard. You've got to be really confident that you know what you're doing and improv your balls off until something clicks and works. Well, there is some things that can help. There is a video about a closer look called Writing Better Chemistry, where he discusses the idea that chemistry is like an energy constantly building up and being flown back and forth between two characters. Almost like a more efficient and streamlined yes and effect. Do watch the video if you're an aspiring writer, it's brilliant. But it also states that sometimes reactions don't have to be verbal. Your character doesn't have to be quipping back and forth the whole time for it to work. And you gotta have stuff in common and differences between them. So perhaps it's ideal to write these two characters as one. Get your usual stuff, your ideals, bonds, and goals for character arcs, or the campaign set out before you. And then write your two heads as sharing those things. but just from their simple, slightly different perspectives on it. Let's say their mother passed a few years ago, and they have this memory of her where she was just laying on the couch reading a book to them as a kid. They both love their mother dearly, that's their bond, but when talking about her, say, Head 1 will talk about the book she was reading, how her voice was soothe and sweet as honey, and that they never really cared about the book she was reading. They just listened to her. But the other head says her voice was coarse. Still, it was comforting. But you missed her eyes and how gently her hands moved across the page. It's the same memory from different angles and perspectives. This shows that one head may be more visual and understands via looking, while the other is more from sounds. Just sprinkle in little things like that throughout your notes, because the smallest details make the character. They don't have to get along with each other at all times, but I do think it's easier if you make them get along and just disagree over smaller things. And maybe separate flaws, where one sleep talks and the other snores, and maybe a plot point that they may not be certain on, whether or not they want to kill or spare the villain who killed their mother, or something along those lines. It's easier, too, to assign one archetype or gimmick to each head, too, for some classic duality. Good cop, bad cop, the brains and the brawn, dumb and dumber, snob and slob. Some are easier and some are harder. But again, argue with oneself rarely, only if pushed by the DM in, say, a big moment, or in a small argument with other players involved. Maybe also have a system in place where if one of the heads say something, make the other respond next time. Or, honestly, I don't know. Do play with opposites and similarities, though, till you find one that you and others like. In order to be more useful, though, I do want to list out just a bunch of traits that I always think is interesting in a character, especially those with two heads. A philomath, which means they love learning. This is usually associated with wizards and their folly to obtain endless knowledge on the weave and magic, which I usually find a bit boring on wizards, but I am immediately interested when it's placed on a different class. A philomath wizard is just a wizard, but a philomath sorcerer is trying to understand themselves via knowledge of other things. A philomath warlock leans into the idea that Lovecraftian idea of having knowledge that one should not have. And the bard is the folly of creating the perfect piece of art. Both of these have the tortured soul archetype if it's unhealthy. Stick it on a martial, and you'll end up having this guy who's trying to perfect the art of fighting, or have this warrior poet vibes. I think it's fun to stick it on one or both of the heads, since it makes it vastly more interesting when both heads love to learn about something or different things. Or if one head is not interested, they may have higher wisdom of the pair, seeing things for how they are rather than what they could be. This works great for multiclasses that aren't wizards in my opinion, but it still works well as a wizard too. It doesn't have to be magic either, which brings me to my next trait. Devotion. Akin to the philomath, but more for religion, faith, or loyalty. It goes great with paladins, druids, clerics, and monks, or any other divine-based class or subclass. Having one or two heads devote themselves to a god or gods of a similar or opposite nature is interesting to me. It can lead to interesting dynamics between the pair, and if you want to get weird with it, make one of them a cleric of the grave or death, and the other a dreams druid or bard, with something with a healing as its focus. Then you'll have this weird generalist that's great at damage and healing, and both will always have a different perspective on the same thing. Maybe that all life must eventually die, but it should be lived and never squandered. Neither is purely good or evil, but it can give them this ethereal vibe. It doesn't have to be to a god, though. They can be devoted to their found family, their love interests, or just to being each other's best friends, since they can never be separated. This suits paladins particularly well with their oaths, but it can work with anything. The final trait I can recommend, if you can pull it off, is to be a little, emphasis on little, abrasive. This is a good combo with some other trait, such as the philomath and thinking maybe they're a little bit smarter than everyone else, or they're a bit up their own ass about how devoted they are to a god, and other gods shouldn't really be interesting. But it is the classic bit of a meanie who really cares with a heart of gold. I struggle a lot trying to put this trait on people, so again, if you're an expert, maybe pair it with something else. As well as that, just do a bit of scouting, pay attention to what other players are doing, what roles they're filling in the party, and fill in what's missing. If the party needs a head to temper their emotions while crying on a muscular shoulder, be the heart and body, or whatever else is missing. I still believe that you shouldn't seek the spotlight, but don't be too passive. But again, this type of character can be quite noisy, and I feel like it's probably best played by someone who likes being a support in games and helping others in real life with little deeds. Make them have interests or similar goals or ideals with your fellow party members. You may not be the party's favourite, or the most famous, or the highest damaging, or the tankiest, but maybe, just maybe, when your character disappears, when you leave that table for a late night at work, or you have to leave the campaign, they will realize just how much they miss you. Hey, I just wanted to say that I'm grateful that you watched all the way up to this point, and I hope you enjoyed it or found this or the other videos mentioned useful. I am making this at a rather odd time for myself. I don't really have any other videos planned outside of a mini-series for making like the Vermintide characters or Total War Warhammer Legendary Lords as D&D characters, but I don't know how interested I'll be in making those when I'm finished this video and college and exams come knocking. I also want to say that I really am no expert, and I am just some person who's made something as an outlet to ramble about my thoughts on a nerdy topic that even most nerds in my personal experience aren't even interested in, so I don't know. I just hope you find this, enjoy the video, and have a good day or life. Seriously though, thank you.